If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and visit us at SQE TV?
This is SQE TV, the YouTube channel for wannabe solicitors with me, Jonny Hurst. In this video, we'll focus on SQE or LPC, which pathway is right for me.
SQE TV.
So let's get cracking. To SQE or not to SQE? That is the question. Now, to paraphrase Shakespeare. Now, it's a question that a lot of people have been asking for the last few years prior to the implementation of the SQE and the few years after the SQE has come into force. Why? Well, a number of students have the opportunity to choose the LPC or the SQE pathway. And what we're going to do now is to look at who can choose the LPC or the SQE first, and then we'll look at which option is the best option. So what are the rules? Well, in general terms, and I stress in general terms, if you started your law journey, and by I mean your law journey, what I'm saying is you started your English law degree or a graduate conversion course, if you started that law journey in 2022 or later, you will definitely only be able to choose the SQE pathway. So there isn't a choice there, it's made for you. But it's the people that have started their law journey in 2021 or earlier, most of whom, if not all, will be able to choose between the two pathways. So typically the last cohort who were able to choose between the two pathways are those who started their law degrees in September 2021 or a law conversion course around about then.
SQE TV.
So how do we start to answer the question SQE or LPC, which pathway is right for me? Well, one thing to do is to share with you the fact that the answer given by commentators like myself has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years, and necessarily so because circumstances have changed. I wrote one of the first articles addressing the question for lawcareers.net in around about 2017, 2018. So 5 or 6 years ago, I was saying, choose the LPC unless there are good reason to choose the SQE. It's now flipped the other way around. And I can say with certainty, choose the SQE rather than the LPC unless, and this is important, unless there are overriding reasons still to prefer the LPC. And there may be. Indeed, it's not wrong for students still to choose the LPC if their personal circumstances are right. But what we will explore later in this video is the types of situations where students should still be doing the LPC, but also the types of situations where students should be preferring the SQE. And it's all based on your individual circumstances. Don't follow the herd. Don't follow your friend because they're doing a particular course at a particular provider. If it doesn't match your career aspirations, you could be someone who wants something completely different. So please do the research, make decisions based on your own priorities, your own factors, rather than someone else's. So why am I saying that the best advice for most candidates is that they should by default be choosing the SQE unless there's an overriding reason to choose the LPC? Why is that the position for most candidates? Well, firstly, it's because that's the position where the law firms and legal employers want to get to ultimately. What they don't particularly like is having a mixed cohort of LPC and SQE graduates. They accept for a period of time that might be the case because they don't want to turn away good talent. So if you've got an LPC, don't worry, you'll still be considered for some time by the law firms. But in time, it will be the case that law firms will want to train students who've just gone through the SQE route. It makes sense that they've all gone through the same educational journey. The other reason for saying that really it should be the default position to choose the SQE, unless there are overriding reasons not to, is about the way that you qualify and the ease to qualify. And what I mean by this is in relation to the on-the-job training that you need to get. Because to qualify down the SQE route, you need 2 years of qualifying work experience. To qualify down the LPC route, you need to complete a 2-year training contract. And as I'm sure you know by now, it's much, much easier to secure 2 years qualifying work experience than it is to secure a traditional LPC training contract. Why? Well, firstly, the number of LPC training contracts are diminishing year on year. Law firms, as they switch and commit to SQE cohorts going forward, are trying to ensure that their cohorts are consistent, as I mentioned before, and therefore with fewer LPC training contracts available, it's going to be much more competitive, much more difficult to get hold of one. And therefore a candidate who's faced with maybe not getting an LPC training contract possibly at all would have to qualify down a hybrid route where they got the LPC, but they would then have to complete SQE2 and 2 years worth of qualifying work experience. And doing SQE2 after you've actually completed your LPC is more training, more education, more cost and more time. And therefore For some students, it might be just best to bite the bullet and do the SQE now.
SQE TV.
So what do we mean when we say there could be some overriding factors which tempt students to do the LPC justifiably as opposed to the SQE? Well, these are things that are very personal about that individual. And it's something about you, your character, or something to do with your profile that would mean that the LPC is objectively a better route for you and your personal circumstances. Let me give you a couple of examples. Well, firstly, if you've got a training contract offer from a law firm and the law firm says to you, we don't care whether you train and qualify down the LPC route or the SQE route, we just want you to qualify with us. For me, in that situation, it's a no-brainer. You choose the LPC because of the higher pass rates. You're going to have much more control, and it's going to be much more likely that you'll qualify in the timeline that you anticipated. Whereas, as we know, the SQE has a much lower pass rate overall, and therefore what you're anticipating in terms of your career trajectory and the timeline, it could be affected adversely if you don't get through the SQE first time. But also choosing the LPC means that you get the opportunity to do specialist electives. And, if you've got the opportunity to do that at no extra cost, it makes sense to do that because that means you can kickstart the beginning of your career with specialist knowledge in practice areas that are aligned to the firm you've got your training contract with. But not everybody has a training contract. So clearly there might be other situations where the LPC could be preferred. Well, what about the examination regime itself? There are some students who actually, when it comes to the multiple choice paper on SQE1, simply cannot perform at the level that they are generally at in everything else because of, for example, a neurodiverse condition that they might have. In that situation, I would say look at the LPC very seriously because if it means you can dodge and swerve around SQE1, that might be your better option. There are all sorts of reasons as to why somebody might prefer the LPC to the SQE and vice versa. But of course, the main thing is for you to make the decision yourself based on your own personal circumstances. As we said, most candidates now should be choosing the SQE. But if there are overriding factors that point you in favour of the LPC, then do so. And please don't over worry about your choice of pathway because ultimately, if you're a good to middling candidate or better, you should be able to qualify as a solicitor going down either pathway, one way or the other. I think the key thing going forwards is that the timeline is less predictable than it used to be. So don't necessarily promise yourself you're going to be qualified by a particular date. There will be inevitably some bumps on the road for many, many candidates.
SQE TV.
So there we are, LPC or SQE. Hopefully it's helped you a little bit more towards making that decision one way or the other. If you like this video, please do subscribe to the channel and obviously like the video as well. And then enjoy the lovely, wonderful jingle that we now have for you one more time.
If you wanna be solicitors, why don't you come and